Well, it is a great privilege to have Lee Strobel, an author, writer, former pastor, a man that God has touched his life, and he tells his story. And we have the privilege of having him here, and we've had 2 great services, and it is our privilege to have him here again. So why don't you give the best welcome out of the 3 services from Friends Church to Lee Strobel, all right?
Thanks, Matthew.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thanks so much. It's just been a privilege to be here this weekend. What a great church, and getting to know the staff and a lot of volunteers and tenders and folks who've come just out of curiosity today. I'm just thrilled with that. It's great to be back in Southern California. I lived here for about 10 years. About 4 months ago, I moved to Denver, and so sorry about that game on Friday night with the Lakers and the Nuggets. And I'm a Nuggets fan now. I don't care. This is great. I loved it. I thought it was a great game. But I live out there, and a lot of my friends out in California did not understand. What do you mean you're going to move to Colorado? They didn't get it. I mean, because they don't understand the concept of winter. I mean, they grew up out here. There is no winter, right? And they don't get it. One guy said to me, I could never live in Colorado. I said, why not? He said, because I could never live in a place where if I accidentally lock myself out of the house, I could die. Makes some sense, you know. The one negative about living there, and there's no kidding, they gave me a phone number, right? New phone number. It's 1 digit away from the local marijuana dispensary. Seriously. I get about half a dozen calls a day, and they're all alike. I go, hello, and the other voice says, hey, man. Which, when I was in Chicago, I was actually 1 digit away on my phone number from the cab company, which was really a problem, because about 2 in the morning on Saturday nights, you get the call from all the drunk people saying, I need a ride, you know. And so it was bad enough getting awakened at 2 in the morning, but then you got to get dressed, get in the car, you know, go pick them up. But anyway, one thing I appreciate, Matthew said, you know, you can talk about whatever you want, and I love to talk about why it is that we as Christians believe what we believe. Is there any credibility? Is there a rationality behind the Christian faith? And I'll talk to one person about that, or 500 or 5,000, doesn't matter, because I think it's important stuff, and I think it's interesting stuff. But I will admit to you, there are times when I get into one of these conversations, it does not go well. I don't know if you ever had that happen, but I had the most embarrassing thing happen a few years ago. I was down south at a conference with my buddy Mark Middleberg, who many of you met here last weekend. And afterwards, the next day, we're going to fly out, so we're going to get some breakfast. And we saw one of these Cracker Barrel places. You ever see one of these things? I'd never been to one, but it looked okay. So we're going to go there. We noticed they had rocking chairs on the front porch. And in the first rocking chair was a young woman, about 18 years old, dark hair, dark eyes, quite attractive. Young man sitting next to her, about the same age. So we had to walk in front of them to get to the door. Well, big deal, right? So we're walking along, and just as I step in front of this young woman, I hear her say, what's a deist? And I thought, I just wrote a book about that. So I turned on my heel, and I looked her in the eye, and I said, a deist is someone who believes that God created the universe, but then he walked away. I said a deist is someone who believes that God sort of wound up the universe like a giant clock and is just letting it tick down. I said a deist is someone who believes that God is distant and detached and disinterested. But I said that's not what the evidence shows. And I began to talk about all the evidence that shows God's involvement in the cosmos, God's involvement in humankind. I started giving all this facts, all this data, all this information. I talked about cosmology. I talked about physics. I talked about biochemistry. I talked about human genetics. I'm going on and on. Their eyes are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'm on a roll. You can't stop me. And I talked about Jesus entering into human history. I talked about his death on the cross, about the evidence for the resurrection. Her eyes are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'm going on and on. Finally, I turned to Mark. I said, can you believe it? I happened to walk in front of her. She said, what's a deist? Mark said, Lee. She said, buenos dias. You know, I really wish that were a joke. That's what happened. It was so embarrassing. So I thought, okay, well, how can I talk to you all today about the evidence for the Christian faith? What can I do? And I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to do something real simple. I'm just going to tell you a story. It's a true story. It's my story. And it's a story that began in atheism. Because I concluded at a young age, as a teenager, that there is no God. the idea, the concept of God is absurd. That God didn't create people, but people created God. Why? Because they were afraid of death, and so they manufactured this idea of this benevolent jelly bean in the sky and this idea of heaven to make themselves feel better when they die. That's what I thought. I thought that the mere concept of an all-powerful, all-loving, all-knowing creator of the universe was just absurd on the surface of it. Was not even worth my time to check out. Now, granted, I tend to be a skeptical person. I mean, that's in my DNA. My background's in journalism and law. You can imagine, you put those two things together, what kind of a skeptic that you get. I was the legal editor of the Chicago Tribune newspaper. And we used to pride ourselves on our skepticism. We never would accept anybody's word at face value. We always wanted to get two sources to confirm a fact before we'd print it in the newspaper. So we actually had a sign in our newsroom that said, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. How do you know? Maybe she's lying. You got any proof? Got any data? Got any evidence? I mean, that's, the kind of the perspective we had. And it spilled over.